The velvet lining of the jewelry box smelled of dust, but the empty space where my grandmother's emeralds should have been screamed louder than any accusation. He sold my legacy piece by piece, and I only realized the truth when his meticulous spreadsheets led me to an auction catalog in Geneva. The velvet lining of the jewelry box smelled faintly of dust and expensive perfume, the scent of my grandmother clinging to it even after all these years. I ran a finger over the indentation where the emerald parure used to rest, the set my fiancé Mark had insisted on keeping safe while we renovated the new place. Safe. That word used to mean security, partnership. Now it felt like a cruel joke whispered in an empty room. We'd been together 7 years. 7 years of building a life, mixing our finances, dreaming about the future. Mark was charming, handsome, the kind of man who always knew how to smooth over a rough patch with a grand gesture, a fancy dinner, a spontaneous weekend trip. He was meticulous, almost obsessively so, about his budgeting, always reminding me that his mother's medical situation was precarious. She had several chronic conditions, and the insurance, while good, didn't cover everything. He carried that burden like a visible weight on his shoulders, and I, being deeply empathetic, carried it with him. I always told him, "We're a team, Mark. Whatever she needs, we'll manage." My inheritance was substantial, not Scrooge McDuck money, but enough to secure our future twice over. The centerpiece was my great-grandmother's antique jewelry collection. Emeralds, sapphires, diamonds set in Edwardian gold. It was priceless to me, a tangible link to my past. But Mark had convinced me to keep it locked away until the house renovations were complete and the home security system was fully installed. "It's just asking for trouble being out right now, honey," he'd said, his eyes wide and sincere, "especially with those contractors coming and going." I trusted him implicitly. He managed the finances, he handled the big decisions regarding safety and assets. He was my rock. It started subtly, the missing pieces. Not the major sets at first, just a single, heavy gold bracelet that I hadn't seen in months. When I asked, Mark frowned, pulling up our inventory spreadsheet, which he managed, of course. "Are you sure, babe? I thought that one was being appraised. Or maybe I moved it to the safe deposit box downtown. You know, for extra security." He always had a logical explanation, a meticulously documented alternative location. So I let it go. I was scatterbrained sometimes. He was organized. That was the balance of our relationship. Then the smaller items started vanishing. A pair of diamond earrings I rarely wore. A delicate sapphire brooch. Each time, Mark provided a paper trail, a scanned receipt for a new security measure, or a memo about moving assets. He was so thorough, so reassuring. I remember one evening he found me looking stressed about an unpaid specialist bill for his mother. He held me close, whispering that he'd found a way to cover it immediately. "I sold a few of those older, less significant gold chains you haven't worn since college," he admitted sheepishly. "I figured, why let good assets sit when Mom needs care? They're insured, and we can buy them back later if you want, but I needed the liquidity now." It sounded selfless, responsible, if a little presumptuous. And truthfully, it relieved a huge weight off my chest. I kissed him, feeling closer to him than ever for his quick thinking. The real shift happened about 6 weeks ago. I'd been researching appraisal values for insurance purposes, just a general review of my assets. I pulled up the high-resolution photos I'd taken of the most valuable pieces years ago, before they went into storage. I scrolled through, feeling nostalgic, until I hit the section for the emerald parure. The necklace, the earrings, the pendant, it was all there in the photo, glittering under the studio lights. I clicked to the next photo slot, expecting the empty velvet box, the one currently sitting in the master closet. But the next slot wasn't empty. It was filled with an inventory list from a high-end auction house in Geneva. I froze. The date on the document was 3 months prior. My blood turned to ice. I navigated back to the main folder, heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a drum solo. I clicked on the folder Mark insisted I couldn't access. Insurance and security updates. I needed the password. I tried his birthday, our anniversary, nothing. Then I remembered a private joke we had about his mother's favorite old movie. I typed it in. Access granted. Inside, there wasn't security documentation. There were dozens of invoices, shipping manifests, and bank transfer confirmations, all routed through shell accounts in different jurisdictions. And there, clear as day, were the transfer confirmations corresponding exactly to the dates Mark claimed he was handling emergency home repairs. The payments weren't going to contractors. They were going to the same auction house, and the descriptions matched my most treasured heirlooms. Edwardian emerald and diamond parure, sapphire cluster earrings, 1920s, Art Deco platinum bangle. My breath hitched. I scrolled down frantically to the largest transfer, dated just last month. The amount was staggering. It corresponded precisely to the sale of the emerald set. I looked at the recipient of the funds, a private account listed only as M. Harding, Medical Trust Fund. Mark's mother's maiden name was Harding. He hadn't just sold a few chains to cover a bill. He had systematically liquidated my entire irreplaceable legacy, piece by devastating piece, and used the massive influx of cash to pay for his mother's ongoing, expensive care. He had been running an elaborate, years-long deception, using my trust and my family history as his personal ATM. I suddenly understood the meticulous spreadsheets, the constant talk of security, the need to keep everything locked away. It wasn't to protect the jewelry. It was to protect his secret until every last piece was gone. I staggered back from the desk, knocking my chair over with a deafening crash that echoed in the silent house. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at the screen, the confirmation email for the emerald sale burning into my vision. I looked at the clock. Mark was due home in 20 minutes. I had proof, undeniable, catastrophic proof, sitting right there on my screen. What was I supposed to do with this devastating truth when he walked through that door? The 20 minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounding like a judge's gavel. I frantically printed every relevant document, the bank transfers, the auction manifests, the emails confirming the sales. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly shredded the paper. My mind raced, cycling through denial, fury, and a terrifying sense of disorientation. 7 years. 7 years of shared secrets, shared hopes, and intimate moments, all built on a foundation of calculated theft. He wasn't just a liar. He was a professional confidence man who had targeted me with surgical precision. I had to create a staging ground. I couldn't confront him immediately, not until I had a plan, not until I understood the full scope. I shoved the pile of incriminating documents into my emergency external hard drive, tucking the drive deep inside the hollowed-out base of an old ceramic lamp on my office shelf, a place he would never think to check, an object so mundane it faded into the background. I wiped down the desk, deleting the browsing history, locking the computer, and putting everything back exactly as it was before I uncovered his scheme. When I heard the key turn in the lock 15 minutes later, I was standing in the kitchen, calmly chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to mimic the carefree wife who had waved him goodbye that morning. "Honey, I'm home," Mark called out, his voice warm and entirely manufactured. He kissed me on the cheek, his usual lingering affection feeling like a slimy coat of paint. "Rough day. I was stuck in traffic for an hour near the bridge." "That's awful," I replied, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I forced myself to look him in the eye. He looked tired, handsome, and utterly unburdened by the colossal betrayal hanging in the air between us. "How was your day?" he asked, heading straight for the fridge. "Did you get those invoices sorted for the property tax?" He was still asking me to manage the small, inconsequential things, lulling me into the illusion of normalcy. "Almost done," I said, turning back to the stove, plunging the knife into a thick carrot with unnecessary force. "I was just thinking about something earlier, actually. It kind of threw me off track." He paused, a glass of water halfway to his lips. This was it. I had to test the waters, see how quickly he would pivot. "Oh, what's that?" "The antique jewelry," I began, my voice deceptively light. "I was organizing some old photos, and I realized I have no idea where the emerald set is right now. We talked about moving it to the high-security vault at the bank, but I can't find the paperwork for that transfer. Do you remember which branch we decided on?" The shift in his body language was instantaneous, subtle but profound. His shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly, and the easy smile dissolved, replaced by a flicker of something calculating behind his eyes. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water, buying time. "Ah, yes, the emeralds," he said, setting the glass down too firmly on the granite counter. "That was a tricky one. Remember the bank vault appointment kept getting pushed back? I told you I handled it differently to avoid the wait time. I moved them into that new safety deposit box downtown, the one near your office, remember? The one I set up last month?" He was improvising, patching the holes in his prior lies with new, immediate falsehoods. The man who had sworn absolute devotion to transparency concerning my grandmother's treasures was now spinning tales about last-minute, unrecorded security adjustments. The safety deposit box downtown. That was new. I hadn't heard of that one. "The one near my office?" I repeated, feigning confusion. "I don't recall that at all, Mark. We usually stick to the main downtown branch." He walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders, his touch suddenly feeling invasive. "Babe, relax. It was last minute. You were so stressed about the contractor estimates. I didn't want to bother you with the paperwork. It's fine. I have the key card somewhere in my jacket pocket, I think. It's absolutely secure. Stop worrying about the assets. I'm handling all the expensive stuff, remember? Just focus on the house plans." He was trying to soothe me, to brush off the question as unnecessary female nagging. But I was no longer the woman who accepted easy answers. I felt a cold, hard certainty settling in my gut. He hadn't opened a new box. He had sold the items months ago. The jacket pocket he mentioned was a perfect misdirection. He knew I wouldn't rifle through his pockets while he was standing right there. "You know what? You're right," I sighed, leaning into his chest for a fleeting second, feeling the urge to physically push him away. "I'm being paranoid. Dinner smells amazing." We ate dinner in a strained silence punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. I watched him, cataloging every nervous tick, every over-explained gesture. He kept glancing at his phone, tapping away, likely checking on whatever current financial juggling act he was performing. As we cleared the plates, Mark announced he had to run back to the office. Urgent email chain exploded. "I'll be back in an hour or so, tops. Don't wait up." The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, I was already sprinting to the coat rack. His jacket, the expensive tweed one he wore today, was hanging innocently on the hook. My heart hammered. I plunged my hand into the inner pocket, searching for the key card he'd so casually mentioned. My fingers found fabric, and then not a key card, but a small folded piece of heavy cardstock. It wasn't a key card. It was a receipt from a high-end jeweler dated yesterday. It wasn't for an antique piece. It was for a brand-new, modern tennis bracelet, purchased with a significant down payment, the remaining balance set up on an aggressive payment plan. The note scribbled on the bottom, in his handwriting, read, "A little something for the mom to celebrate the big insurance payout clearing. Keep the payments rolling." The insurance payout, the one he claimed was still pending? He hadn't just sold my jewelry to pay off existing bills. He was celebrating new funds coming in from the very scheme he'd used my inheritance to facilitate. He was buying gifts for his mother with money he hadn't actually secured yet, meaning he was relying on his next move, perhaps selling the remaining, less significant pieces I still possessed, or worse, dipping into our joint savings. I gripped the receipt so tightly the paper crinkled into dust in my palm. He wasn't done. He was escalating. And I was alone in the house, knowing he was out there, leveraging my future for his mother's comfort, and that he would be back soon, expecting me to be blissfully unaware of the new betrayal that had just occurred less than 24 hours ago. The realization that he was still actively funding this deception, actively planning his next move while wearing the mask of the devoted partner, sent a jolt of white-hot clarity through my panic. He wasn't winding down. He was accelerating. The tennis bracelet receipt confirmed it. He had a cash flow problem, and that problem was now directly tied to whatever he was doing at the office right now, scrambling to cover that aggressive payment plan. I couldn't afford to wait for him to return. If he was scrambling, he might try to recover the evidence on the hard drive before I could make a copy. Or worse, he might try to manufacture a reason to lock me out of the accounts entirely. I grabbed the lamp, unscrewed the base, retrieved the external drive, and plugged it into my laptop. I had about an hour, maybe less, before he returned, radiating false exhaustion. I needed to get the entire digital trail, the financial records, the auction documents, the communication logs I'd managed to scrape from his shared cloud storage, off my local network and into an untraceable, secure location. The upload speed was agonizingly slow. Every percentage point felt like a personal victory against a ticking clock. While the data transferred to a military-grade encrypted cloud service I'd set up years ago for sensitive work projects, I began scouring his personal financial documents, looking for any indication of why. Was it purely medical bills? Or was there a deeper, more sinister motive fueling this extraordinary level of deceit? I found the paper trail leading back further than I thought possible. It wasn't just his mother. Mark had 2 younger siblings who had suffered financial setbacks, one a failed business venture, the other a crippling lawsuit. He wasn't just supporting his mother. He was propping up an entire network of family dependency, using my assets as the invisible scaffolding. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Deep within a folder labeled Tax Prep 2021, I found something that made the air leave my lungs. It wasn't about money at all. It was a series of heavily redacted documents, clearly official correspondence, related to a previous major incident. The documents mentioned a lengthy internal investigation at Mark's previous place of employment, a high-level financial firm, and a non-disclosure agreement so severe it practically barred him from employment in the sector. The key words that flashed across the heavily blacked-out sections were chilling: misappropriation of client funds and falsified collateral. He hadn't just been fired. He had been professionally exiled under a cloud of serious financial misconduct. This wasn't just about helping his family. This was about maintaining a lifestyle and covering up a past that threatened to destroy him if it ever came to light. My inheritance was his lifeline, his shield against professional ruin, not just a means to pay hospital bills. The progress bar hit 98%. I held my breath, listening for the sound of the car. Nothing yet. Then I saw it, a new file on his desktop, one I hadn't noticed before, saved just this afternoon while he was supposedly stuck in traffic. It was a PDF titled Exit Strategy, Finalizing Asset Transfer. My fingers flew across the trackpad, opening the file, praying the upload would finish before I had to close it. The document laid out, in cold, bulleted points, his plan for the next phase, after the jewelry was completely sold off. It detailed the sale of the house, our house, jointly owned, with the intention of liquidating my half, claiming I was agreeable to moving into a smaller, more manageable property due to stress. It even had a draft email to the title company. He wasn't planning on waiting for me to eventually find out. He was planning on walking away clean within the next 6 weeks, leaving me homeless and penniless, with only the memory of a loving partnership. The progress bar hit 100%. I ripped the drive out, shoving it back into the lamp base, replacing the weight. I had the evidence. I had the entire conspiracy mapped out. Just as I stood up, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Mark. Traffic cleared up faster than expected, pulling into the driveway now. Don't forget we have to review those estate planning documents tomorrow morning. Super important stuff. Estate planning. He was rushing home to discuss writing me out of his future while simultaneously preparing to steal my present. I looked toward the front door, the sound of crunching gravel under tires confirming his arrival. I had seconds. I didn't have time to call anyone, not legally, not effectively. I needed to intercept him before he could notice anything amiss, before he could access his computer or start talking about important documents. I needed to buy time, and I needed him to confess, to admit where the last few pieces were before I could bring everything down on him. I grabbed the first thing that came to mind, a heavy crystal vase from the mantelpiece. It felt solid, weighty, and utterly necessary in my grip as I positioned myself just around the corner from the entryway, waiting for him to step inside. The key turned in the lock again, and the door swung open, bathing the hallway in the dim porch light. The entryway light cast a long, distorted shadow as Mark stepped inside, shedding his coat onto the armchair. The same coat I knew held the receipt for the new, unearned bracelet. He looked relieved, perhaps even a little smug. He hadn't anticipated speed. "Hey, I'm back," he said, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud. He didn't even look around, already anticipating that I'd be waiting obediently in the living room, preparing to discuss the estate planning documents. That was my opening. I stepped out from behind the doorframe, the crystal vase held loosely at my side, catching the low light. The sight of me, unsmiling, holding an object that could easily inflict serious harm, stopped him dead in his tracks. His practiced, charming expression faltered, replaced by genuine shock. "What in God's name are you doing?" he managed, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register I'd never heard before. He glanced nervously toward the stairs, toward the office where my laptop held the entire digital blueprint of his downfall. "Don't move," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. It felt like I was inhabiting someone else's body, the voice of a cold, calculating stranger. "Don't you dare try to play dumb, Mark. I know everything." His facade shattered. The calculated concern vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. He looked around the pristine kitchen, as if searching for hidden cameras, a witness, an escape route. He understood instantly that the game was over. "You went into my files," he hissed, taking a half step back towards the front door. "You had no right, Amelia. I was handling things." "Handling things? You liquidated my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy. You sold the Emerald Parure for what? To fund your mother's comfort while you simultaneously planned to sell this house out from under me?" The crystal felt cold and heavy, a symbol of the shattered trust. He lunged, not for the door, but for his briefcase, clearly hoping to retrieve a phone, or perhaps some other tool of distraction. "It's not what you think. They were medical emergencies. You have no idea the pressure I was under." That was the moment I reacted instinctively. Whether it was fear or sheer rage overriding all self-preservation, I swung the vase, not aiming to hit him, but to block his path and create distance. It connected with the wall just beside his head with a sickening thud and a shower of splintered crystal. The sound was deafening in the quiet suburban evening. Mark froze, staring at the wreckage, his face pale. He knew I wasn't bluffing anymore. He also knew the noise would attract attention from the neighbors. Okay, stop," he pleaded, holding his hands up, the practiced charm briefly resurfacing, edged now with desperation. "We can talk. We can fix this. Amelia, please put that down. You're hysterical." "Hysterical?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "You are a thief, Mark. You used my love for you as a lever to strip me bare. Where are the rest of the pieces? The sapphires, the platinum bangle. Tell me exactly where they are before I call the authorities and tell them about the misappropriation of funds at your old firm, too." Mentioning his past professional scandal made him visibly wilt. He slumped against the wall, defeated. They're mostly gone. I paid off the immediate debts. But there's one thing left. One piece. I kept it. I swear I kept it." "What piece?" I demanded, lowering the now empty vase slightly, but not releasing my grip on the sharp base shard that had broken off during impact. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "The diamond solitaire pendant, the one your father gave you. It was the hardest to move, too recognizable. I pawned it temporarily. I was going to buy it back next week. It's at that pawn shop downtown, Second Chance Treasures on Elm Street. I have the ticket. I was going to surprise you." A pawn shop. Not an auction house, not a secure vault, but a grubby pawn shop. It was the final pathetic detail of his elaborate con. "Give me the ticket," I ordered. Mark slowly reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. As he fumbled for the specific slip of paper, his fingers brushed against his phone, which he'd placed on the hall table when he first walked in. In that microsecond of distraction, as his attention was focused solely on extracting the pawn ticket, Mark's phone lit up with an incoming call. The screen displayed the caller ID in bold, glowing letters. Judge Thompson's clerk. He saw it at the exact same time I did. His face went ashen, the color draining away completely. He didn't reach for the ticket anymore. He lunged for the phone, his desperation shifting from me to whatever dire legal trouble this incoming call represented. He snatched the phone, clutching it like a lifeline, backing away from me toward the living room. No, he muttered, breathing rapidly, pressing the accept button. "Hello? Yes, this is Mark Alcott. What? Wait, that case was dismissed. How can you possibly be calling me about that old—" his voice broke off as he listened to the voice on the other end, his eyes wide with sheer, blinding panic as he realized that the old case was anything but dismissed, and that the call had nothing to do with my jewelry. It was about the massive past fraud he had desperately tried to bury, the very thing I'd seen hinted at in the redacted files. Mark stood paralyzed in the center of the living room, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the voice from the courthouse that confirmed the absolute collapse of his carefully constructed world. The panicked squeak that escaped his throat wasn't for me, or the jewelry, or the house. It was the sound of a man realizing the federal net he thought he'd evaded had finally tightened. The silence I had maintained while holding the shattered crystal base was my final weapon. I didn't need to shout or threaten anymore. The evidence of his past financial crimes, combined with the clear present-day theft of my assets, was now fully exposed, broadcast by the very person he was trying to deceive. I quietly placed the broken vase piece on the mahogany side table, taking a slow, deep breath that centered me completely. I walked to the wall outlet, unplugged the router, killing the Wi-Fi, effectively isolating him and cutting off any attempt to remotely delete data or coordinate with anyone else. Mark finally ripped the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in horror. "They're reopening the whole investigation," he whispered, the sound hollow. "The old firm, they found new evidence. They tracked the shell transfers." He looked up at me, and for the first time in days, his eyes held a terrifying clarity, unclouded by deceit. He saw me not as his victim, but as the potential instrument of his complete downfall. "You were busy selling my family's history to pay for your present crisis," I stated, walking calmly to the coat rack and retrieving his briefcase. "I didn't look inside. I didn't need to. And in doing so, you forgot about your past. I didn't need to call anyone, Mark. You just did it for me." I opened the briefcase and pulled out the encrypted hard drive containing every transfer, every invoice, every email. I set it deliberately on the coffee table next to his abandoned phone. "I have everything," I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. "The jewelry, the house, that's all recoverable. But the professional fraud, the attempt to flee legal accountability by leveraging stolen assets, that's a different category of crime. That's what the authorities on that call are interested in, isn't it?" He sank onto the edge of the sofa, all the fight gone. The man who had charmed me, who had managed my life with such ruthless efficiency, was reduced to a whimpering defendant in his own living room. "Amelia, please, you can't. They'll give me decades. I did it all for my mother, for them." "No," I cut him off sharply. "You did it for your reputation. You did it to avoid facing the consequences of your previous failures. You used my loyalty as collateral. That stops now." I walked over to the hall table, picked up my own phone, and opened the dialer. I didn't hesitate. I called the number for the specialized white-collar crime division I had quietly researched while uploading the evidence. The contact information for a lawyer specializing in internal corporate investigations. The very people who handled cases like the one on his old firm's file. "Yes, hello," I said into the phone, my voice projecting confidence that was only now starting to become real. "My name is Amelia Hayes. I believe I have information regarding an ongoing investigation into Mark Alcott, specifically concerning the misappropriation of client funds from Sterling and Vance, circa 2019. I also have evidence of subsequent money laundering and asset liquidation." As I spoke, detailing the location of the physical evidence on the coffee table and explaining the scope of the digital proof I held, Mark watched me, his face a mask of utter devastation. He didn't try to stop me. He knew the game was lost. When I ended the call, I gave him the final instruction, delivering it with the detached finality of a judge passing sentence. "They'll be here shortly. I suggest you don't try to leave. Don't touch anything else. You can tell them what you told me, or you can let the evidence speak for itself. Either way, this partnership, this life we built, it's over." I walked past him, retrieved the key to the small storage unit where I kept my seldom-used personal belongings, and stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door firmly shut behind me. I didn't look back at the sound of his despairing cry. I walked down the driveway as the distant but distinct sound of approaching sirens grew louder, heading not towards Mark, but towards the pawn shop downtown. The solitaire pendant might be recoverable. It was the last tangible piece of a devastating lie, and I was going to get it back, not for the monetary value, but as the final act of reclaiming what was unequivocally, rightfully mine. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, and as I walked into the gathering darkness, I felt lighter than I had in years, finally free of the heavy, beautiful chains he had tried to force upon me.